Greetings. Today is Thursday, March the 5th, 2026. My name is Brother Leroy Shabazz. I'm an emergency management practitioner in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. If you don't know what an emergency manager does for your county, or in some states they have parishes, if you don't know what they do, I suggest that you continue to follow along with this program and process. Welcome to lesson number 1 of the Black Emergency Management 7 Kwanzaa Principle calendar study. Okay, this is a calendar study, and I hope that you will now go to the websites above, FEMAP.us or CECERT.org, and take the time to download the free calendar. It's a crude calendar, but it's very important that you take the time to download our material, because as the year goes, we will upload more material, more video for you to follow along with us in this study. The 7 Kwanzaa principles are delineated in each days of the week for this calendar, and they extend from the last Kwanzaa celebration and period of 2025 into where we are now, and extending forward. And we're going to really talk to those principles, to speak to those principles as we move forward in the year. Again, thank you for joining us, lesson number 1. This again is meant to be a year-long study, so please follow along with us in the material. I would like to make a special note before we move on to the Nation of Islam that in 2010, Minister Farrakhan told us to learn emergency management at the end of Savior's Day lecture. He told us to learn emergency management. He didn't tell us to learn disaster preparedness, but that's no problem. We want to make sure that we deal with what the difference is at this point. It is not my intention to downplay the importance of disaster preparedness. My intention is to stress the importance of emergency management. Emergency management is a managerial function that creates a framework that reduces a community's vulnerability to disasters and hazards. Again, emergency management is a framework that deals with community. Disaster preparedness can be that individual family or that individual business, right? So emergency management is far more significant to what the minister in 2010 told us to learn, as opposed to basic disaster preparedness. So over the years, we have in our social media, you can look at our social media, see we've been around. You can go take a look at some of our YouTube stuff before we regroup and get that stuff reconstructed. And of course, if anyone's local here in Cincinnati, please get in touch with me and help me do this. And our active websites, you can take a look at those as we regroup on building those, right? But CECERT.org and FEMAP.us are our major websites. That we will be uploading more videos and documents to this study. Also, if you haven't downloaded the calendar at this point in time and you don't have the capacity right now, as you follow along with us, please go to r4w.academy. You can stop this video now and go to r4w.academy and look at there's a 4-minute cartoon right there that we've created that allows you to understand what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish in this process. And then you can come back and get into the study with us as we continue. One last quick slide before we go right into the lesson. This slide is a slide that confirms that from 2010 to 2013, I have become a CERT instructor. You can read this article at CECERT.org. Here is a photo of the first team of persons that I had certified as members of a CERT team, Community Emergency Response Team. In lesson number 2, we're going to go really deep into what CERT is and what it means to become a CERT person, to become a disaster asset and an extension of first responders in your community, and then to have a better understanding of how the overall system works, and which is why from 2013 to 2023, I'm back here in the back as training with county emergency managers. I'm back in the back there because I had the sniffles that day. But some of these folks are county emergency managers who are charged with creating a framework that reduces a county's vulnerability to disasters and incidents. So I have a serious commitment to what I'm doing. And with that being said, let us move forward into our first lesson, which is called Our Disaster Continuum. Lesson 1, Our Disaster Continuum. And when I say our, it actually is not just Black, but our American reality of our disaster continuum. But I'm really focusing on a perspective for the urban Black populations using emergency management terminology so that we understand what's going on in our community. I'm really focusing on what says ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery. We really need to understand what's going on. So the objectives here is one, to an introduction to the basic 3 types of causes of disasters, and I'm going to introduce you to a 4th type of disasters as a FEMAP advisor, Federal Emergency Minority Advisory Program. I'm going to introduce you to a 4th type. The second objective here is to introduce you to what's called a disaster continuum. A disaster continuum is a timeline or a time frame which we in emergency management call the disaster continuum perspective. And thirdly, I want to introduce you to the consideration of does the American Black population and other peoples in America have legitimate irreconcilable differences? Obviously, as a student in the Nation of Islam, I think we do have irreconcilable differences to the point where there will be a need of separation of the Black population from others. But that's not my call. My call is to talk about it as an emergency manager, discuss it, facilitate a conversation, and if it's when it comes time for that to happen, to help facilitate that in a peaceful manner. So moving forward, let's get into the lesson. As an instructor for a FEMA course called CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams, we have a training manual, and in the training manual, I would actually introduce you to 3 causes of disasters that are recognized by FEMA. There's natural disasters, which would be your hurricane, tornado, flood, tsunami, something to that extent. I would introduce you to technological disasters, which would be relative to a chemical plant explosion or a train derailment or even a cyber event, something that deals with technology. And also I would introduce you to something called intentional or man-made disasters, which was a reality of terrorism and war. This is how you'll be introduced through the CERT process in the training manual. Now, as a Federal Emergency Minority Advisory Program advisor, we introduce what's called a 4th cause of disasters, which is divine intervention. I'm not going to go long with this. Matter of fact, you can actually go to FEMAP.news and you can actually download a 2015 report. And I hope that the students in the nation who want to learn the emergency management under my instructions, right, will go look at the report and learn from the report, because I talk about particularly the issue of a secret meaning of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I just introduce you to some basic stuff. It's a very good report, and it will help you in the future as we need to help our community in the future. Moving forward, I want to touch just a little bit more on this divine intervention reality, right? The point is, as an emergency manager looks at what causes incident and what created a problem. And when you look at biblical reality, right, that nations went down because of certain reasons, right? And the only thing in reference to biblical phases of a nation that I want you to understand is that every nation goes through certain phases. And these are not definitive, what I'm about to say right now, but a nation goes through an agricultural phase. And then it goes through a craftsman or a manufacturing phase. And then it goes through a knowledge or technology phase. And it's in that last phase of a nation where they got knowledge and technology that they tend to be cocky. And just like during the natural disasters of a hurricane, you might get a warning, a siren that lets you know that there's a problem. Or in a chemical plant, you might get a siren that goes off that warns you about something's about to explode. Well, in the phase of a nation, you're talking about this divine intervention, you usually get somebody who calls himself a warner to give you some information to say, hey, you need to back up and stop doing what you're doing. And those tend to be the times when the higher people in the nation say, oh, get out of here, you're laughing, you're crazy, blah, blah, blah. The whole laughing stuff takes place and all of that. So divine intervention is a reality that we need to consider, particularly here in America, because we consider ourselves, particularly Black Americans, tend to consider themselves as a people who've been through 400 years of something and biblically are about to come out from under that. I point out here where the Dr. Martin Luther King and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad met. A lot of people don't know that that meeting took place, right? I'm bringing up this photo also to point out that what we don't know much about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is that there was a man that taught him. To taught the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam, we recognize him as Master Farad Muhammad, who showed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the process of years that he was taught, the 3 years that he taught him, he showed him a plane that was a half a mile by a half a mile in the sky, which we call the mother plane, that according to Master Farad Muhammad, that plane was created to, at a certain point in time, send out other smaller planes that would produce that would reap havoc on the United States of America. So again, we have a lot to discuss, but I'm gonna move on right now and just leave that in the air right there. So let me return to a more grounded view of disasters by talking about intentional disasters. Again, intentional disasters tend to be about man-made realities of terrorism and war. As we go into the next part of our lesson where we look at the disaster continuum timeline, we're going to be able to understand intentional disasters in a better perspective. But intentional disasters are about terrorism and war. And when we talk about terrorism and war, what I need you to understand is that terrorism and war is not just an abstract ideal. It's actually where you have an adversarial condition where there's an opponent and an adversary, or two adversaries. For example, in the situation here where we look at Uncle Sam right now, his attitude is the way he's dealing with Iran is like, hey, you know, that's the opponent and this is what he thinks about you. And with his adversarial condition, he is not coming just as like, I'm mad at you. He's coming with tactics. The principle of war diagram that you see right here allows you to understand that terrorism and war is not just an abstract ideal. You have an objective, you have an offensive, you have unity of command, you have simplicity, you have methodology that you use against your opponent. And the way that America is dealing with Iran right now, the way that America dealt with Venezuela, those were adversarial conditions. And here in the United States of America, in the Black community, we need to understand, and we'll understand this in the timeline, in the disaster continuum process that I'm about to go into, that Black suppression has been a form of terrorism and war against the Black community ever since we've been here. We don't want to make a big deal out of it right now, but we need to just understand that that's really what it is and was, and move on from there. So now we're going to move into the disaster continuum and take a look at a timeline and see what we can look at from this timeline and understand. So at this point in this lesson, you have learned that there are specific types of disasters. You should be able to name them. There's natural disasters, technological disasters, intentional disasters or man-made disasters. And then if you accept what FEMAP, the Federal Emergency Minority Advisory Program, is presenting to you, there's a fourth type of disasters called divine intervention. So no matter what the disaster, we can look at that disaster in what we call a time continuum or a disaster continuum or emergency management continuum. Again, this is just a timeline that allows us to look at what happens when the disaster comes. So here in the beginning of this frame right here, we look at how there's a preparedness phase, and then the disaster hit, and then there's an actual phase of how long and what happens during the disaster process. This is the disaster continuum. Now, what else can we learn from this? We're going to move forward. Right here, I've added a few more words to this basic continuum to let you know that certain things are taking place during this continuum, right? During the disaster, right? Before the disaster, you have a protection phase, you have a prevention phase. This is, around your preparedness area. I'm not going to go hard into this, but emergency management students with me need to understand and take a look at this, and we'll go deeper in this in the future. But there's a process here. There's the prevention and protection or preparedness phase in the beginning there. Then when the disaster hits, you have your response phase. And then after the response is over with, then you have your recovery phase. And so there are things that are going on here. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I have mitigation up there, and that's also a phase of the disaster process. But we're not going to get into that right now. As a side note, I will tell you that if you see the 5-point star, the red star for the FEMAP logo, that's what these mitigation, protection, prevention, response, recovery, the 5 points is what that star represents. But again, so you have your disaster, but moving on, you have your disaster time continuum, giving you an understanding that there are certain things that take place in the time frame, in the continuum process, before the disaster, when the disaster hits. We're going to look at that even deeper. So as we look deeper into this, then as an emergency manager, I can pull this up to show you that there is a whole slew of activity that emergency managers look at to happen before, at the incident response point and beyond when a disaster takes place, right? But now for the sake of time, I'm going to breeze through this, but I suggest that what you can do is pause this slide right here and just kind of take more of a view of what's going on in these phases of the disaster. Particularly what I want to do is let you look at that after the response phase here and during the recovery phase back up in here, that there's always, even in the beginning, you take care of people's psychological concerns and their well-being, right? But then in the recovery phase, it clearly understands that engaged networks, here we are, engaged networks and services for psychological support. That's a long-term thing, and over here you ongoing psychological support, and even in the beginning you provide basic human needs and support services. That's keeping the people in a humane frame of mind as you're taking care of them, right? So again, you can pause this and look at this. Again, you can look at all of this, but I need to move forward for the sake of time. So I am going to assume that you actually paused this and looked at the time frame, the last frame of the things that take place during the disaster, and you've kind of figured out that certain things are supposed to happen. So I'm going to ask you right now, if you were looking at this time frame, let me get my pointer here. If you were looking at this time frame and there was a rural area fire in California, how long do you think it would take to recover from that? Let's look down this timeline. It's more than weeks and months, probably, maybe several years. Okay, so that could be the time frame that we're looking at of recovering from this one disaster. How about a severe snowstorm? A severe snowstorm may take what? Would it take years or months or what? Maybe some weeks? Okay, so if it took that, then, you know, you got an idea of like after the disaster, those things that happened in the last slide where people are rescued, and certain things happen to keep them safe and to get them back on the recovery phase. What about a coastal tsunami? Okay, again, letting you know that once a disaster hits, there's things that are taking place within the frame of it. How prepared were you? What was the response reality? And then what was the recovery reality? So with that being said, let me go to the next slide and ask you about one more disaster. So let's add American slavery to, to the equation here. How long did it take for American slavery for the people that were subjected to that to recover? So here was your disaster. Head on down the timeline and you tell me. And I'm going to move forward. Now, without getting all whiny and stuff like that, because that's not the purpose of this slide, of this presentation, what did not occur for our disaster when we talk about slavery was there was nobody that came with search and rescue, and nobody engaged network of social services for psychological support, and there was no ongoing psychological support. There was no interim housing other than some basic crude stuff. And again, this happened for not years, just years, but for 200, 300 years, okay, of actual physical slavery. Again, this is not a whiny presentation because even during our years of being through here, we adjusted on a subhuman level. And we had inventors, the whole 9 yards. Again, we are a durable people, but I just want us to understand that certain things did not happen to us according to what happens after a disaster. And the reality is that there are certain consequential behaviors and activities that our community has been subjected to. So, in moving on, again, the basic disaster occurred, and then there was not just like a weeks or months or years, there was several hundreds of years that we adjusted to a situation, and we came out after that to where we are right now. Let's even go look at that even a little bit deeper. Okay, so now in looking at this a little bit deeper, right, let's look at the fact that, okay, there was slavery, and after the end of slavery, what else happened? Okay, we didn't just come out of slavery and keep moving forward. We ran across something called black codes, and black codes had an effect on the all the blacks that were freed and whatever else was going on in America. And then after the black codes, let's say that was over with, we had something called Jim Crow. And Jim Crow did what it did, and it lasted up until wherever Jim Crow lasted. I'm not going to give you a time on the timeline. And after Jim Crow, maybe we had something called, and these are just ideological disasters that happened within the black community after slavery. I just want you. So this disaster right here might have been miseducation because nobody taught us who we really were. So we miseducated, and then we end up falling into this thing like this disaster of like trying to figure out who we were civil. I'm not going to say that the civil rights was a disaster. I'm just saying that looking at a timeline, we had certain realities that we just didn't go from the end of one disaster to another disaster, but there are disasters after certain disasters that continually affected the black community to the point where this could have been the heroin epidemic back in the 70s. So, you know, there are certain things that kept a people from actually recovering to their fullest extent. And so here we are, let's assume that here we are right now, and let's bring this maybe to the, let's say this was about the 80s, the 90s, and I'm going to fill in something here with using a couple of videos that showed you another disaster that came across our community that you need to consider in what's going on with the black community and how we are dealing with disasters. And again, these disasters, slavery, Jim Crow, black codes, miseducation, whatever else we want to throw in here, and whatever I'm about to play to you, the video I'm about to show you, these are intentional disasters. They were not just natural disasters. They were not technological disasters, even though technology may have been used, but these were intentional disasters that have been played on the black community. And we're not going to talk about this right here because we'll go into that in a different slide. But moving on. So as I said from the last slide, I am going to drop a video. These are two 2-minute videos that will cover some incidents that occurred within that timeline, that continuum of the last video that covers the 80 period or the 90s period, right? And so when this first video starts, it's me calling into a show and I'm questioning about a guy named Giuffria, whatever his name is, who was a colonel in the military, and in the 70s he wrote a paper like, can he intern black people? And he came in with the Reagan administration in the 80s. And interestingly enough, as an emergency manager, right, the National Incident Management System, which we use today, was really actually started being created in 1982 during the Reagan administration, right? And ironically enough, for students in the Nation of Islam, Minister Farrakhan in 1985 had his vision in 1985 of being on the plane, and Honorable Elijah Muhammad telling him about the Reagan administration starting a war. And ironically, again, the National Incident Management System first document did not come out until 2004. So again, I'm saying a lot here. Matter of fact, I'm just saying. And I'm going to just play these videos.
Mr. Gordolfo, whatever his name was, as a colonel, he wrote a paper about trying to intern black people.
Okay, let me say, brother, it's obvious that you have a lot and Dr. Powers is going to respond, but this didn't just happen in 83. This happened from the beginning. I just quoted you scripturally, whatever means that they needed, they would destroy the male children and keep their women alive. So whether it's crack, or whether it's the even the white female, it don't make no difference what they use. They gonna use whatever they can. So we understand that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I am a student. I am a registered student. So I'm studying, brother. But I do have work to do in reference to disaster.
Well, I'm familiar with FEMA as well, and the preparedness. I did something on that some years ago. It's ever going, but the destruction that's inevitable, only God Himself is going to be able to save that. So I'll let Dr. Powers respond to you. Obviously, we knew he was an FBI agent in Cincinnati and Detroit and other places. He's a professor now, but I'm glad he can respond. And you can leave your number off there just in case Doc want to talk to you, okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, my brother. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, and I tried to explain to the Cincinnati community at that time, Brother Manier, that this disaster was coming. And what the brother's saying, I spoke on a radio program there at some peril to me in my career, indicating that Ricky Ross, who was actually given crack to distribute across the nation because the CIA couldn't get into the communities, was in Cincinnati. He was in Lincoln Heights, Ohio. I even worked the case against Ricky Ross, and he began to put so much drug on the streets in Cincinnati, which was it wasn't drug free, but it certainly wasn't a disaster.
It certainly wasn't like that
back then, and we knew it. And I was working the cases, and they simply never authorized an arrest against him. And there's so much more to that. I won't get into that right now. They never of that. So, and as you're right, this has been a plan from the beginning. But what I've always tried to do, Brother Manier, and I'm glad the brother said that, because it's not a new thing for me, was try to lay out that if we do not make some moves now, as the messenger said, if we don't do not to take control of ours now, this is only going to get progressively worse. And that's a clear indication of what has happened in a city like Cincinnati, and the shooting of 100 times of the guy up in Cleveland, and the 40-some murders here in Baltimore. That's all predictable, and the messenger predicted it. We just didn't heed it, and we're just not doing enough to stop it.
Okay, and as I play the next video, I just want you to pay attention to the fact that they're talking about the potential of the Constitution being suspended in the same administration, the Reagan administration.
Reagan was elected to the presidency, he installed Louis Giuffrida as head of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Giuffrida was an old cold warrior from Reagan's California days whose specialty was suppression of unrest and dissent. Giuffrida, North, and George Bush began to turn FEMA into an instrument of domestic anti-terrorism.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason, and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent. And with North and Poindexter and Casey, you had a group of people who saw Americans who disagree with them as the enemy.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it. I'm wondering if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe
I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this,
Okay, so ending that, my major point in bringing this video forward was these two videos forward was to talk about how the crack cocaine was being pushed on us by people within our government that shouldn't be pushing drugs on the community, because that's against the American way of life on the written surface. And we also just had a little brief listen to something that was talking about suspending the American Constitution. So the two videos I just played were videos that reference potentially something that could be happening or something that happened during a time frame. Let's say this was the 80s. Let's say this was the 90s right here. Okay, so we're talking about disasters within the black community. We're talking about intentional disasters. We can call it black suppression, an intentional disaster. The crack cocaine, an intentional disaster. But for us, for us, it was clearly a disaster, but for someone else, it might have been making totally good political sense, because black suppression or in an adversarial situation, that make perfectly good sense for them. For example, let me go back here. Let's go all the way back on the timeline. So let's say this is the Civil War. If this was the Civil War, let's say you're the slaveholder. If you're the slaveholder and you're coming up to this process right here in the Civil War, that's going to end your slavery. So you definitely got a problem, because this is a disaster. So for you to make black codes a reality is a perfectly good political move, because you want to put those slaves right back into a situation where you can control and deal with them, right? But for the slaves who were coming out of slavery, right, the Civil War was a chance to be free of the slavery, right, to the point where you can actually move forward, and then you're moving forward until you bump into to black codes, which kind of puts you back in a terrible position, but you're moving forward. And then you move forward into the reconstruction period of the United States of America, and you trying to build, but you're really not building as strong as you can as a human being, because you've been miseducated. So again, if you just look at the timeline, it gives you an idea of what's going on with disasters. The disaster continuum allows you to understand what's going on with disasters, because if you go back, you can look at certain things that are supposed to happen. If you go back at those previous slides, you can look at certain things supposed to be happening after a disaster, the recovery process, right? And so the recovery process for us and recovery process for certain other persons who consider certain things as disasters may be just totally different spectrums, different places on the spectrum. Okay, so what we're looking at right here is, as we move forward to the next slide, is the potential of coming together, or the potential of divine intervention, which I threw up as a reality. And I'm throwing this up as divine intervention as an emergency manager, not just as a whimsical thing that we just at a point right now where some stuff is about to hit the fan one way or the other. So moving forward, I got to tell you, that last slide took a lot of energy out of me because there's so much going on. But as we get to the conclusion of our presentation, we are in a situation where we, as the Federal Emergency Minority Advisory Program, would like to work with our community to get us prepared for what's about to happen. We want to work with the United States Department of Homeland Security, which is the reality of the National Incident Management System that deals with the security for all Americans. And they have what they call a whole community concept where everyone is supposed to be involved. Now, of course, that don't work necessarily like it sounds, because there are some good people and there's some straight devils in the process. But if we intelligently learn about emergency management, not just disaster preparedness, and we engage in the right manner, we should be able to, and that is the Black community should be able to engage with the system so that whatever is coming our way, that we can get through it either together or partially together to the point where we survive disasters. Divine intervention is a reality. Whatever's coming at us as a disaster, we need to deal with protection, prevention, preparedness, those things that will get us ready for it as communities together and apart to move forward, to be able to respond and recover. Over here, I just point out the Nguzo Saba because, again, with the calendar, what I want us to do is look at a principle every day in order to try to get the Black community to talking about the principles that will allow us to create that movement toward a renaissance of our community. We've been through a lot, and we need to move forward where religions won't necessarily get us there. We need to establish and connect to certain principles that will help us to either connect to the religions or not connect to the religions, just to move forward as a more intelligent people. Because again, coming out of what we come through, we've come a long way, and we need to recover from the disaster because we haven't fully recovered from the disaster that America has laid on us. But now is the time to do it and to move forward. With that, I'm just going to move toward the conclusion here, and that will be enough. And it's moving on. Again, we've come to the conclusion and the summary of our objectives. I hope that you have learned of the three types of disasters that's common, called the three types of disasters: natural, technological, intentional, or man-made disasters. And then you here to understand something of the fourth type of disaster that we call divine intervention. I hope that you have been introduced and understand something of the disaster continuum, and you can go look this over and maybe get a better understanding of it. What the disaster continuum allows you to understand of what happens before disaster, when a disaster happens, and what goes on after disaster, the processes of preparedness, response, recovery. And I hope that you have been able to take a basic consideration of, are there irreconcilable differences? And if there are irreconcilable differences between the Black population, American descendants of slavery, and the other populations, what are we going to do about it? Is there going to be a civilized exodus, or civilized reality to what needs to be done, or is it going to be crazy? Is it going to be divine intervention? What needs to take place? As an emergency manager, I'm just introducing you to a process, and I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson, and we will conclude. Thank you for taking the time to study with us. And the next lesson that we do will be about CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams. And you can reach me at leroy@femap.us or Leroy, Leroy, at cecert.org. Thank you. Peace to you and yours.